Yeah, since Brian brought up the subject of pollution, another thing that I never thought I would be working on directly was becoming in essence, a pollution scientist. So I'd like to share the screen again and talk about a new tool we've developed to overcome our inability to make measurements on important issues that was funded by the Schmidt Family Foundation, for which we're very grateful. So the pollution issue is one that's been in the public's consciousness for a few years, but it seems like the news stories are now just increasing every day. You hear more and more about our plastic obsession. So we live in a plastic world. It's an amazing factoid that half the plastics that have ever been produced have been produced in the last 9 years. That's how much our plastic use is increasing. And there's good reasons for why we do that. I mean, it's cheap. Plastics are derived from natural gas and oil, and we still got big reservoirs of these fossil fuels. The substance itself is a polymer, and it's highly moldable, so you can use it in a process called injection molding that almost all consumer products that are made out of plastic have an injection mold somewhere that was used to make them. You know, plastics are light. Some of them can be made to be insulating. They're waterproof, and they're really corrosion resistant, unlike metals. You can put them out in the environment and they last forever. And that resilience is the flaw that we're now up against on a planet-wide basis in the ocean. We've essentially trashed the oceans inadvertently through our plastic obsession. And all those pieces of plastic in this depressing picture here floating at the surface, they don't stay large. There's some more large pieces that have accumulated after the tsunami in Japan released a whole bunch of plastic into the ocean. Instead, they break down and they become these insidious pills of cyanide. I like to call them microplastics. And these small pieces of plastic, there's two different kinds. There's ones that are used in the injection molds. These are called nurdles. And these get shipped all over the world by industry using container ships. I'll show you a picture of container ship traffic worldwide. They were, until recently, used in cosmetic products like in toothpaste and in facial scrubs. Fortunately, a lot of the developed world has banned their use. Microfibers, we all like our nice, warm, fuzzy fleece, but those release a huge number of plastic particles in the environment whenever you do a load of laundry. And then all those bottles and things, the trash that's washed into the sea, they break down into microplastic pieces as well. And that's due to the action of waves and sun. And here's an interesting picture that Ethan Edson, who invented a lot of the technology I'm about to tell you about, with the Schmidt Foundation funding, took. So that's a picture of a larger piece of plastic. You can see it's the size of a dime, but if you zoom in, you see it's got all these faults, sort of like the San Andreas fault. And all those little faults will crack apart in the coming days or weeks and make much tinier particles. And then they're drifting around the ocean. They're small, and all sorts of marine life takes them up. Usually inadvertently, sometimes deliberately, thinking they're food. When I called them cyanide pills, I actually meant that. Well, it's bad enough that plastic is inedible. What's worse is that those microplastic particles actually act as a sponge for the toxins that are already present at really low levels everywhere on the planet now, just through our industrial activities. All the PCBs and other related compounds that are out there at really low levels get concentrated into the plastic, and then they end up in marine organisms, and ultimately they can end up in us. So it's an open question. as to whether we're getting affected directly as people. Indirectly, we are, because ecosystems that we value are suffering, and the organisms that compose those ecosystems. But the jury is still out on whether ingesting microplastics by humans has health effects. I got to think that the evidence will accumulate that it does, but we're still in the early days of that. That's a picture of a former student of mine who did some work in Brian's lab as well, Molly Waters, and she exposed a very tasty organism, the blue mussel, that Brian's done a lot of work on, using mussels as a sentinel for climate change, because they live in the intertidal zone. So they're out in the air half of the day as well as in the water. But they're also commercially important as a food source. And she found just a brief exposure to microplastics makes their respiration rate, the rate at which they use energy, go way, way up, and that this effect lasts for weeks. And that means that the mussel doesn't have as much energy to do other things like get bigger or make eggs and sperm so it can reproduce. So let me show you, if I can, sorry to monologue this a little bit, Brian, but let me just show the audience a real quick video. It's only a minute and a half long here, of how we currently measure microplastics and why the Schmidt Foundation was intrigued with our approach. So this is the old school way. You go out in a boat, you drag a net through the water, sort of like they were doing a century and a half ago with the Challenger expedition. The net filters a big volume of water, and everything that's caught in the net ends up in a little cup at the far end. There's the cup being unscrewed. This is from a cruise a few months ago off the coast of South Africa that Ethan Edson, the inventor technician in my lab, did. There's Ethan. He's taken the sample and he's looking under a scope now, and he's actually having to manually count out all the pieces of microplastic that were caught by hand. And this has been sort of the standard way to measure microplastics for going on almost 2 decades now. And you can see a microfiber there up top. There's Nelson Mandela on a rand coin from South Africa. Here's all the microfibers that were in that particular sample he just caught. So he actually makes sort of little works of art when he's doing this, but you can imagine this is incredibly labor intensive. Ethan was inspired by having done this himself when he was an undergraduate during a research cruise to come up with something better. So he invented something he calls Manta Ray. There's a picture of a desktop unit, and I'll show you a picture of one that goes underwater. What is Manta Ray? Well, the animal Manta Ray is a filter feeder. It's a big fish that filters plankton on its gill rakers, and that's how it gets its nutrition. The automated Manta Ray sucks water in either over the side of the ship, or in the case of this little box here, through a hole in the side if it's stuck underwater. And what it does, I'll show you a little animation here, hopefully you'll be able to see the red dot moving around. As it sucks water in, it detects particles by using a laser, and it actually measures their size using the laser. And then it takes a picture of them using a spectroscope, and that lets us know whether the particle, is this a live particle, like something, a planktonic cell, or is it a plastic particle? And he actually takes pictures and uses machine learning to figure out what kind of particle it is and what it's made of. So there's a microplastics particle. And he can do this automatically using this instrument so that he doesn't have to do it by hand anymore. So he can process hundreds to thousands of times more particles in the same amount of time, picking through a microscope like we saw before. What's cool about his invention is it makes these beautiful pictures at the same time of the plankton, which is the base of the food chain in the ocean. So we not only are able to count the microplastics, and you can see in the box at the lower right-hand corner there, there's some microplastic pieces there, including some microfibers. And these were found, by the way, these fibers that are in this picture were from 1,000 miles offshore, off the coast of Africa. There are microfibers from fleece way out at sea. Imagine that. That's how much plastic there is in the sea. Now, this plastic is not distributed uniformly. So one idea that Ethan has is let's strap as many manta rays as we can on the sides of ships. And this picture I'm showing you now shows the global shipping network using container ships, which is absolutely amazing. There's at any given point in time close to 100,000 container ships at sea plying the world. 90% of everything that we're wearing or carrying right now probably came to us on a container ship. So Ethan's thinking this might be a really good platform to get a synoptic data set of where the microplastics are. The reason we want to know why they are this will give us some idea of where the source might be. Is it coming off the land in particular areas? It also allows us to make intelligent decisions about things like growing commercial species in an aquaculture setting. So we wouldn't want to have a blue mussel farm like we have up off the coast of Maine, for example, or in the great state of Washington, sited in an area that naturally has a high level of microplastics because the mussels would not do as well there. So sorry that was so long-winded, but I want to tell a little story about sensing the ocean and how we're trying to get a handle on its state using new sensors and technology.
Thank you for watching the Future Frogmen Conversation Series. Please check out our website at www.futurefrogmen.org.